Hello and welcome back to Azure Terraformer. This is another excerpt from a live stream where I talk through a conversation that I had at my local Coffee and Code in Columbus, Ohio. In this one, I get into it with Eric, who has a question about Azure Data Factory and its appropriate use. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Then I met this guy named Eric, who came up to me, never met him before, and he was doing work with Azure Data Factory, ADF. You know, I love acronyms. And I just happened to have experience working with Azure Data Factory before. And he was like, well, I'm trying to use Azure Data Factory with a REST API. And, he's like, this doesn't feel right. Should I be doing this? And I was like, that's a great question. And so I asked him a couple more probing questions. I'm like, okay, so are you getting data? Are you getting other pieces of data from other data sources? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay, so what types of data sources are those? Are those all REST APIs? Or are they like SQLDB, MongoDB, blah, 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 whatever? And he's like, well, yeah, they are. I'm like, okay, so now what are you doing with that data? Are you kind of like staying in your lane? Are they individual silos of data ETL that you're doing where you're like grabbing the data from Mongo, pulling it in, dropping it someplace, grabbing the data from SQLDB, pulling it in, dropping it in a different place, calling the REST API, pulling it in, dropping it in yet another different place? Or are you kind of like pulling all these 3 or n pieces of data and then like jamming them together? And the example I gave, I love this example. It's like Data Factory, it's kind of like, it's kind of like playing with Play-Doh, right? It's like, and if you have kids, I'm talking about, or if you were a kid once that within the last 80 years, you've played with Play-Doh before, there's different colors of Play-Doh, red, green, blue. And then there's little tools that you use, like that you push the Play-Doh through to kind of make different like shapes of the Play-Doh. Like there's a tube that like you smush a clump of Play-Doh through and it comes out like a cylinder, or it comes out like a star, or it comes out like a little spaghetti strips and things like that. And Data Factory, basically that's what it's doing, right? It's like you've got all these different sources of data, and those are just little canisters of Play-Doh, and you're sucking up all that Play-Doh, and it's choose your own adventure, right? Like you can choose if you want to just suck the Play-Doh up and just dump it, as is, as a big clump, or if you want to pull it through, like push it through this like cylinder, and just change the shape a little bit, or also if you want to take the red and blue, smush it together, and make purple or whatever, and then like make it into a star shaped or spaghetti, and so I asked him, like, are the different Play-Doh, red, green, blue, like getting smushed all up together, or are they like separate? And he's like, excuse me. He's like, they're kind of separate. And so then I was like, well, okay. Then you're really not using the main like powerhouse that ADF is for this case, right? Then I said the last thing that I would probably think about would be ADF also has this really nice operator layer, right? Where it's like, it's got this slick user interface, has, status indicators of like, is it processing green, yellow, red, kind of stoplight status indicators, like healthy, not healthy, broken, not broken. And oftentimes when you use ADF at scale, you might have devs or data people, data engineers, that are designing the data workflows. And then you have operators that are monitoring these workflows and like seeing if they're all healthy. So if he was in an organization where they had invested in like this operator layer and basically all data coming in, you've got an ops team that's like monitoring the data coming in, making sure the data is healthy and it's part of their normal flow, then, even though technically it doesn't make a lot of sense to pipe it into Azure Data Factory, it conforms with an existing operating model. And if you decide to, dev outside of that, then you're going to cause additional friction, right? And those operators are going to be like, Eric wrote this crazy function for anytime we did a REST API. I have no freaking clue what this thing does. It's like off in, Candyland, and I don't know what it does. So I have really no idea how if it's healthy or broken. It's just doing its own thing, right? And so now you've kind of broken your operating model by picking the right tool. Whereas you could kind of pick the best of both worlds with Azure Data Factory. If you have that investment in that operations layer, you can have an Azure Data Factory. You can have that Data Factory pipeline call an Azure function, so you can still do your Python code. I think Eric wanted to write it in Python. He's like, why don't we just write this in Python? I'm like, yeah, write in Python, put an Azure function, have your Azure Data Factory call the function, then all your operator peoples are all happy, and they move on with their lives. You move on with your life. You have, code that's like maintainable and sane, because like he was having trouble processing like this nasty JSON that was coming in. And, the Azure Data Factory is kind of designed for kind of conforming or uniform data structures. And so whenever you have really wacky data structures, Azure Data Factory gets a little unhappy. Anyways, so that was a good conversation with Eric. Yeah, cool guy. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I do like my metaphors, so it has got me into trouble a couple of times, depending on which one I've used. But I think they're really useful in helping convey an idea or a concept to somebody, and take a rather complex technical concept and distill it into something that's very intuitive and relatable to a lot of people. In this example, I think you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find somebody who doesn't know the basic composition of Play-Doh and the mechanics of working with Play-Doh. I think these are probably the best sorts of metaphors because they have the broadest audience. Anyways, if you like my metaphors, smash that like button to hear more, and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Anyways, that's it for me. This is the Azure Terraformer, signing off.